as mentioned a little earlier, the goals of the project is to address MDGs 4, 5, and a little bit of 6 by ensuring that there's an increase in the number of pregnant women accessing antenatal services and increasing those HIV-positive pregnant women who have access to PMTCT services throughout the country itself. And we are working in rural clinics with limited power and limited connectivity, and that is one of the challenges that we've been looking to overcome with technology, is how do you implement a system which requires a bit of connectivity but does not require it to be fully functional all the time. So within this, the Rwanda Health Enterprise Architecture project is an initiative of the Rwandan Ministry of Health, and it's found within the Ministry of Health as a core objective of a national level. And within the RHEA project, we are looking at the Rwanda HIE project itself, it being a sub-project of Rwanda, of the RHEA project. And here we see that the Health Information Exchange is leveraging off of the requirements and the workflows and any of the architectures that we've lifted out during the initial study of understanding what would Rwanda's health enterprise architecture look like. What are the business processes it is addressing, and how do we best do that and map these two technologies? For us on the call, something that we'd like to lay out is an enterprise architecture is a living initiative. An enterprise architecture is not a solution in itself, rather it's a set of specifications and designs that are instantiated in a solution. And this is one of the differences and that we want to raise a little bit when we talk about taking EA forward in a country and instantiating on that architecture. So
hello? Hello,
yes.
Dr. Carl. I'm sorry to interrupt, but would you like to slower your voice so that everyone could hear your voice well, okay? Try to speak slower.
Thank you. Should I fall back a few slides and pick up again?
Yeah.
Okay. I think coming back to, we've spoken a bit about the issues that we're trying to address in Rwanda, and that is shown illustrated here by the prevalence of HIV, which is one of the big issues that we're facing, and particularly this project is focused on addressing maternal mortality and infant mortality in Rwanda and in the larger of Africa as we move into the future. The images that we see below here are taken from worldmapper.org, and it's a great visualization to show where the prevalences of these challenges actually are. As mentioned earlier, OpenMRS is an open source medical record system that we have a lot of experience with, and this is an illustrative map taken from the OpenMRS website as to where they've deployed systems or have registered deployment of groups using it. And we can see there is quite a prevalence of it in Africa, particularly up the east coast of Africa and into the western horn of Africa. While there are many more instances of OpenMRS running, it's important to note that it is a broadly used tool and does form one of the foundational components of the HIE architecture from what we deem the point of care. And I'll unpack that a little bit later as we get to it. Stepping back to this slide and unpacking this a little bit more, this quadrant is very illustrative of some of the practices that we adhere to in implementing eHealth solutions in developing world. And to sum it up, the key that we lift out is to be country and needs driven, but being wary of and being aware of vision and direction at a global level, and not to be globally vision and driven by global vision down into country needs. Each country is different and faces different challenges. So what we see with this quadrant, courtesy of Dave Lubinsky, is the process of finding solutions that address local country-specific needs and implementing them and ensuring that we're able to achieve the results we're looking for. Once we've done that, it's to look at, from this implementation, lifting out components and portions that can be taken to an architectural level within a country and eventually that influencing where global health architectures are moving towards, the general requirements, preferred standards, guidelines that are implemented in the country. And as you move down into the next implementation, is taking the global level architectures into global health solutions, which then address country health solutions. So this counterclockwise cycle of implementing health systems has given us the ability to really respond to what we see on the ground, because we're taking that as our first point of contact, while being cautious and conscious of what is available on a global level in terms of architectures. We believe in an implementation-driven approach as to being a useful way of developing higher level health architectures. Just a quick check, is this speed okay, or am I still a little quick? It is a challenge with South Africans, we do talk very quickly.
Hello, Carl, it's now fine. A little slower, I hope. Okay?
Great. Thank you.
Okay, can now proceed.
Coming back to this slide, what this image and Venn diagram is here to illustrate is the harmonization of many projects and initiatives that we see in Africa, and the approach that we've taken as Jembi in many of these to create an overlap and leveraging off of other projects' success and contributing to, in a way that we find a rising tide lifting all ships. And this diagram shows again the evolution of where the initial principles of finding health systems that adhere to open architectures and using standards in information systems such as here in the original IDRC project called OASIS, taking these principles and learnings as we moved into completing and starting the Rwanda Health Enterprise Architecture project, which is the middle orange diagram. And within this, both of these funded by IDRC, moving into Rockefeller Foundation, and then moving into the Rwanda Health Information Exchange project funded under PEPFAR HIE. The white blocks are illustrative of particular projects, sub-projects within it. And here we see that the Enterprise Architecture project, what it's done is created the Rwanda Enterprise Architecture, but provided the requirements and definition for the Rwanda Information Exchange project. And in addition to that, the combination of the Enterprise Architecture projects in Rwanda and a research project in University of KwaZulu-Natal here in South Africa has developed a component called the interoperability layer, also known as the OpenHIM. And I do believe Ryan was across at the Wayne was across at the OpenMRS meeting and the pre-meeting around architecture, outlining that a little more. But not getting too held up on this slide, as a visual, what we're wanting to represent here is the many intersections and that projects come together with. And this also shows the overlap of requirements and needs that many projects are finding, that there is motivation to look at the higher level view of health projects as a whole, and especially to step away from a silo-driven approach to health information systems. Moving on with that knowledge and insight and that little bit of background context as to the issues that we're addressing, where the projects come from, and our approach of being country-driven by the requirements and needs, we're going to take a moment and step into our actual project, implementing the Rwanda Health Information Exchange. The acronym HIE is Health Information Exchange, and you'll find it popping up many times during the presentation and in conversation over this call. The goal of the Rwanda HIE is to improve maternal and child health in Rwanda, and in particularly we're focusing at a district called Ramangana, where we look at implementing a solution in 15 health centers. And I'll unpack how we do that a little later. But before we get that, a bit of context of the map that you see of Rwanda at the moment is Rwanda is a small country in East Africa, right here, more between just a little bit left of Kenya and Tanzania. It has a population of approximately 11.5 million people, where our catchment area, we should be looking at a portion of that as we work through the system in its early phases. So it's a small country with a small footprint, and it does make it very interesting to work with, and also a very good ground to implement some technical solutions and evaluate what it works like as we start to scale. Rwanda has adopted a vision of its eHealth strategy, which is based on an ISO standard, which I'll outline in the next slide, has condensed it to focus itself on creating better benefits by building on the pillars of community-based care, primary care, hospital health systems. This diagram is an illustration of where Rwanda is moving towards in terms of its health and its approach to its eHealth strategy into it. As we can see, the strategy is a generalization of the 14639 house architecture, if we can call it that, which has a foundation of your standards, your eHealth infrastructure, ensuring that it has governance in it, its various domains that is built upon the infrastructure and the infrastructure towards a common goal. Now, this is a standard that we're seeing come up quite a bit, and this house architecture does drive a little of how we move forward, taking the implementation into country. Now, with that mentioned, and what we're seeing is an investment from Rwanda into eHealth, which is key, and I'll raise that again towards the end of the presentation. What the goal of implementing the Rwanda HIE towards is to actually look at addressing MDGs 4, 5, and 6, and that is particularly focusing on increasing the number of pregnant women who have access to antenatal care services, as well as increasing the number of HIV-positive pregnant women accessing PMTCT services in this particular district as our first phase, which is the Rwanda district, and we will then scale that out to country in the next 2 to 3 years as we start to harden the technical solution we've put in, as well as addressing the programmatic side of it, which includes understanding the clinical workflow changes that need to happen in clinics to better make use of the system. So what we're seeing at the moment is that the HIE, the Health Information Exchange, is an instantiation of the eHealth vision and strategy, which is supported in its requirements and processes and governments by the Health Enterprise Architecture of Rwanda, the RHEA project itself. So we're seeing the step through and through of how these gathered pieces of information work together towards creating a common goal and moving forward on it. We're coming back to this again. The RHEA project is actually an initiative of the Rwandan Ministry of Health, and particularly the eHealth Coordination Unit, led by Dr. Richard Gakuba, and he is an integral part to our project and our main client if we look at it from the commercial terms in it. And here we see that RHEA does seek to develop an enterprise architecture for Rwanda, something I mentioned before. Again, stepping down from there into what's actually deliverable, what you can see in terms of software and features, here we step to the Rwanda HIE, which is an instantiation of this architecture to support the goals moving forward. And here we see that the HIE is based on some of the key areas of the RHEA project, such as lifting out the requirements, the various workflows documented, ensuring that we're working towards objectives from the architecture which are mapped to the eHealth strategy, and utilizing the standards that are prescribed, that we've been researching and prescribing in Rwanda, and that the Rwandan Ministry of Health, and particularly the eHealth unit, have adopted. This is also illustrative of our implementation-driven approach to the HEAF project, which stands for the Health Enterprise Architecture Framework, and I would be happy to share that website with anybody who requests it a little later. Doing a project of this scale has required quite a team for us to get working on it, and we've been working in Rwanda for the good part of 3 years, where we've been actively working on it, and Chris has been involved. That's Dr. Chris Seibrecht, has been involved in Rwanda for the better part of half a decade in working with it. So what we see in terms of the team that we've had involved is first and foremost the Ministry of Health of Rwanda, are an integral part to this project, not just as a receiver of what we're doing, but actively participating and bringing the work we do into Rwanda. We have a range of institutes, both African and international. We see it, for an example here, working with a local group in Rwanda, Pivot Access, to work on the project as well, and we're seeing this being illustrative of our approach of building local in-country capacity development to support the project, and a range of international groups and partners who have actively contributed to the project and who are consuming it too. Again, an illustration of some of the partners that we've had on this project, and also interestingly is the range of funders that have contributed towards a common goal and a common understanding and set of ideas, which is something we found very interesting as we've defined the architecture. It creates a common platform for groups to get behind and support, be it partners or be it funders. There is a direction as to where we're moving towards. It's interesting to note that this project was originally started by the IDRC and the Rockefeller Foundation, and now has moved on to PEPFAR and CDC funding. This is a nice sidebar to see how the funding has migrated. Coming down a bit to the nuts and bolts of what we've been trying to do. This is a slide that has been used a few times and is illustrative of what we see an implemented enterprise architecture looking like, and in essence the vision of the Health Information Exchange of Rwanda, where we have a range of applications, particularly focusing on the client registry, provider registry, facility registry, and terminology service, and shared health record, being able to exchange information through the interoperability layer to external systems, which we refer to as point-of-care systems. Any units in health centers being able to provide care. And these are the point-of-care or external systems are standalone systems and do not require 100% connectivity to the architecture, which is the interoperability layer and above, to ensure that it functions correctly. That architecture is a distillation of what we found in Canada, which is the Canadian Health Infoway EHR architecture, and we're following a similar model and design at this stage as to how we see this coming out in the field. So here are these similarities between these two architectures. There are quite a number of them, and we'll look at what we're doing in Rwanda is reviewing this as well as other architectures and understanding where are the best of both worlds and what do we bring into it. So currently what we have in Rwanda and what we've instantiated and what forms the basis of the OpenHie component set is the architecture in front of us. The ability for point-of-care or point-of-service applications such as OpenMRS, a clinical medical record system, or Rapid SMS, which is an SMS-based community health worker system, to communicate through the health information mediator to access shared health information for unique persons in the country collected by the registered providers and where that particular piece of information is collected. It's also important to note that every piece of information stored in the shared health record is directly mapped to a standardized terminology unless there is a defined exception from the ministry where they've created their own set of terminologies to map the data against. So with that architecture in mind, what I'm showing in front of us now is based on the lessons learned and where we've come from, we've taken this component-based approach and instantiated this architecture using the tools listed in the slide in front of us. Here we see that OpenMRS being the point-of-care service for the facility-based medical record systems, Rapid SMS, a mobile phone framework instantiated to work for community health workers, communicating through the health information mediator, the OpenHIM, a software product developed by Jembi and the University of KwaZulu-Natal's Health Enterprise Architecture Laboratory project, facilitating communications between the facility registry, which is instantiated in Resource Map, a tool by Instead, a group with offices in the US, Argentina, as well as Cambodia. The provider registry supplied by IRIS, which does that is supported by IntraHealth, and OpenEMPI is another open source tool supported by Sysnet International to provide a unique client. OpenMRS, again, providing a shared health record, and the Apollon DTS is a terminology service which we tend to use. These are the foundational tools of the Rwanda HIE, as well as the OpenHIE, the first steps towards it. To outline a little of what we found as we started implementing these eHealth services and the components and what they do, what in front of us now is a brief explanation of each of these components of the registries and the architecture and what their functions within the overall project. The client registry is a single point of truth for all clients or patients within the system, be it national or district, as we're working with at the moment, and its role is to uniquely identify and maintain the most up-to-date point of truth record for any patient in the system. The provider registry fulfills a similar role, but focused at the healthcare providers, anybody from nurses through to community health workers who interact with the patient and record health information for them. A very useful tool that we're finding is the use of a facility registry, which allows us to uniquely create information available for each health facility within a country. And we're seeing there are a lot of interest in other countries implementing the facility registry to give them better access to which facilities they have and what services are available in it. The shared health record is the single point of truth for all health information relating to a patient in the system, and its data is stored against each patient with which provider collected it, when it was collected, where it was collected, and which standards are used. For each health piece of information or observation, that data is mapped against a standard to allow semantic and syntactic interoperability in the long run. We have the interoperability layer, which ties all these together and creates a single point of access for any point of care system to integrate with the system and make use of the advantageous features that are available of having this information available. The HIM is an aggregator and a single point of contact for any outside system to connect and utilize this information. It forms the heart of the architecture and ensures the orchestration, which is the finding of the correct clients, providers, facilities, and any information in the health record are gathered correctly. And it also speaks standards-based languages such as HL7 version 2 and can be configured to talk many other standards that we're working on. Point of care applications, as I've mentioned before, any applications working where at the face of care, where interacting with the patient. This could be OpenMRS, it could be a mobile phone-based system, and we've taken the design of this to not focus on just implementing this architecture for a single application, but to create a clean interface that would allow any application who's able to consume our services to engage with this architecture and this rich data store that is existing in Rwanda. I've mentioned the OpenHIE a little earlier, and what is interesting to note is that the OpenHIE adheres to that original quadrant diagram which I presented of understanding country-based country requirements and lifting these out now to a national global scale. The OpenHIE, which name should be changing in the next few weeks, Dr. Paul Biondich is leading this initiative, and for those of you who know Paul, he's also one of the founders of the OpenMRS community and the software within it. And with that and the experience that we've come from on that side, the OpenHIE is looking to build a community around these components. The tools may change as requirements evolve, but at this stage, they're based on the tools that I've outlined a little earlier. The OpenHIE has emerged from the RHEA experience and the implementation of the Rwanda Health Information Exchange, again illustrating our implementation-driven approach to national and global architecture and solutions is solving problems first before theorizing the best way of doing that, but being sensitive to that cycle going through it. And as we now move into the next year of our work in Rwanda, what we're seeing is that the Rwanda Health Information Exchange will now slowly become to be seen as an implementation of the OpenHIE, which I've mentioned the name has changed underway. This again is that illustration of the cycling through of having a country experience drive some of the requirements and the architecture as well as the solutions for a global scale. And what we're now going to be evaluating, testing, and working towards is how do you take a project that has driven the creation of this tool to now become a consumer of this generic tool and work towards that. There are many advantages in that and challenges that we face. Some of the quick ones are that the country then becomes a client of the product that they created, and that may be a challenge in the agility of the country, but the advantage is that, that the country can slowly become more engaged with other groups who also have a vested interest in the success of this solution to maintain its availability and the sustainability of the project as a whole. So some findings that we've found a little bit, and we've broken these down into two or three areas that we move through as in implementing this project and general eHealth services and discussing with Dr. Richard Kakuba what his findings are around how do you make eHealth programs successful in countries. One of the points that he raised is that country leadership is key, and any groups working within country should consider the sustainability of the project as one of the major factors in the early design of it. Many times we find that sustainability and the governance and the longevity of the project are only considered after the fact. Once it's built, once it's up, once it's running, as the money's running out, there is this expected handover approach without much pre-warning and building capacity to support this in the long run. What RHEA has done and what the Rwanda Health Information Exchange, RHEA, has done has been to look at this from the get-go, from the beginning of the project, to focus on the sustainability and the governance of it by including the Ministry of Health and having them be the primary sponsors and client, and investing in their teams to be actively participative in the project. That is not just sitting on a conference call, but actively involved in the creation, deployment, and management of the tool moving forward. Some of the other findings, as I've touched on already, is that leadership and support from the government is a large factor in the ongoing success of eHealth projects. That's often something that as a implementing partner or thought leaders or anybody who's providing a service doesn't have much control over. To date, I'm yet to find ourselves being able to prescribe to a government to invest in eHealth where it isn't on their agenda at this stage. But working in an environment where this is prevalent and you've got this thought leadership in looking towards this year does create a more rich area to attempt to ensure the sustainability of the project moving forward. And an example of this that hopefully has been illustrative just as I've been speaking through this presentation is the fact that Rwanda has invested in an eHealth division within the Ministry of Health, and as a national eHealth coordinator, now teams working focused at this area. Often, in many cases, eHealth is an afterthought coming into supporting health services, but isn't given the resources required to do the job it needs to do. These are just some factors to consider that we look at when working in countries, is to partner with local ministries of health and work at building the capacity to support it. Without stepping down a little bit into the actual implementation findings of what we found over the course of this project and still ongoing, is that low resource settings are actually a very rich environment to advance and provide advanced information systems for development. In a lot of developed worlds, you do face the challenge of legacy integration, the fact that things are done this way and will always be done that way. But in an area in low resource settings, one's often faced with a green fields approach where there's nothing to be built on top of, and it's up to the group to drive that forward. So this is something that we've been very cautious of and very excited about, because with this opportunity there comes a responsibility to set a theme that is sustainable and is able to be supported by groups on the ground. So while you may look for the most advanced information systems and ways of doing that, one needs to take into consideration the capacity of the local teams. There's no use building a software application using the latest technology where nobody in the country understands how to do that. You need to focus on development and capacity building. Another factor we look at is that because there are constraints on capacity and other resources in these countries, we often find that sharpens our tools and promotes better development practices, better documentation, and the employment of good practices in both implementation of the project, as in going to site and putting it on ground, but as well as the development and the design and the architecture. If you have a lot of tools, you'll use all of them, and often not to the best use. Where if you're constrained, we do find that there's a lot of innovative thinking that comes around with that, and some great things come from it. The other side of that sword is you don't have a lot of resources, and you may miss one or two things, and that can be extremely dangerous. So there's a balancing act that we find coming out of implementing in low resource settings. Open technologies and the lower barrier to entry based technologies will play an increasing role in low resource settings, particularly because of the try before you buy approach, that many times health systems are not a standard that fits all. Microsoft Word is great. Many people have the need for a word processor, but the same analogy can't always be made for health systems, that many health systems require customization to meet the unique workflows in countries as these are taken on. And that's something that we find having open technologies being more promotive of customization and design changes, and as well as allowing us to build local capacity in country to continue the ongoing support of it. And that takes me to my next point, is investment in local capacity, particularly in the development and the requirements gathering and the architecture of a solution. Does take a little bit more time, but what it does do is provides valuable in-country expertise to reduce the cost of ongoing maintenance and support of the system. And our hypothesis is that by investing in this, we create a more sustainable system, because the expertise to integrate and use a system like this do not reside in consultants or groups remaining out of the country, and the first way to get any sort of support is to fly them in, but rather there are local teams which are better set to be more responsive to this and can do the majority of the work. So this also extends past just the project, but into what we call the program. It's the people factor of any project underway, the implementation of the solution you're looking towards. Coming really down into the technical side of that for any groups working in the software development, and I'm sure this is something that many have found, but interesting to illustrate, is that scope creep is inevitable in an iterative and implementation-driven approach. You don't know what you don't know, and often with a vast system, taking the time required to do all the requirements gathering would give you everything you need, but by the time you start to implement it, you often find that those requirements are dated, and latest technologies and tools have come out that better allow it to be done a different way. So scope creep is inevitable in it, as well as some design change coming through it, but that does need to be managed. That is something that Jembi is actively working on from the lessons of the past. Planning for the unexpected seems to be a little counterintuitive, but many times you don't know what you don't know, and you need to make sure that in your resource allocation towards implementing and rolling these projects out, we found that time needs to be allocated towards the unexpected. The little things such as the clinics are not ready for you because certain aspects don't have networking, or that there are major software components that various groups, especially working in a distributed team across multiple organizations, haven't quite managed to get to in the time frame, and that forms a critical part of what you're needing to do. Past that, another point is to look past the software to the solution, and that is something that many groups are coming towards, is the creation of a service, not a software product. And many times we've had to relook at what we're trying to do with the software tools that we're doing and drop the tools in light of finding a better solution for it. So be cautious of being married to your particular technologies. Be open to changing, but consider the impact of that as you go. Ensuring that a system speaks the local dialect is important. Many teams would work with English, and in Rwanda we found that the consideration needed to be taken to ensure your system spoke French and Kinyarwanda, which is the local dialects that are being used. This also does promote better user adoption and better uptake with the system. In the long run will aim towards meeting the goals we set for the project. Something that came up with our technical team and is often very blasé in the days that we're working with now with our internet servers being virtualized, is to be aware of physical border restrictions on data. Health data is extremely private, and there are many times where technical teams need to consider the fact that that data should not be emailed or hosted on tools such as any virtualized server tools such as Amazon, or that are keeping these data centers out of the country. This is a challenge we face with Rwanda, and working remotely is the need to often work on sensitive data in country and limit the flow of data out of the country itself. The last 2 points in this area are talking again to the first two. Plan for change and expect delays outside of your control. We faced in Rwanda the fact that the national data center, which was being developed and from the ground up, i.e. being built and servers put into it, faced considerable delays for us and put our project plans behind time. These are things that are out of your control, but as best you can, try to identify your mitigation strategies for these tools, and don't consider the basics there. Check that they are available. And our final lesson that one of the final lessons, definitely not our last lesson we've learned, is to be agile and structured. Especially when we're communicating in an agile environment, it's important to show the impact of decisions down the road. Often a quick change in software that may take a week now seems like a good idea, but unless you can trace that through until the end of the project and actually show that a week timed now is not a week for the current tasks being done, it's a week at the end of the project where certain things will not be done. So while being agile is a valuable approach to implementing health systems that are so broad and diverse, it's important to have a structure and be able to show some of the impact that these decisions have as you move along. So as I wrap up towards the end of this presentation, these are some photos of our team in country as we were rolling out. Probably one of my favorites is this one on the bottom in the middle left, with the power went out, and due to our time frames, the server was on a UPS, and the guys just kept working through the blackout into the night or into the darkness with using laptop and UPS power to get moving in the field. For those interested in what we did and a little bit more around this, our current implementation blog is hosted at rwandahie.blogspot.com, and there you can read a little bit about the challenges we faced in going live in the field. It's not a very technical blog. It's designed to be readable by general public to give a bit of an illustration of what we do as a group. Another tool which we've made use of and continue to make use of is Hingex, which is a tool designed to track health resources and assets in a collaborative way. And I'd recommend that anybody looking to understand what assets are out there and possibly reuse them in other projects, such as the house diagram and that, look at Hingex as a tool and identify the assets there. It is a very rich tool to be able to store and contribute assets to, and you can have a look at our RHEA project, which is hosted at the assets are hosted at hingex.org/RHEA-project. Thank you, everyone. That brings me to the end, and I think my 30 minutes of time, a little bit over. My apologies for that, and I'd be happy to take questions as we go.
Thank you, Carl. That was a very comprehensive presentation. Thank you very much. We actually had a lot of chats going on the background, so allow me to go through them one by one. A lot of questions were coming from Cambodia, from Dr. Sambat. So they were asking, maybe you can reflash the slide on the Rwandan Health Enterprise Architecture, because I think we'll be referring to that mostly for the questions that we have. The question was, do all of the domains and the registries reside in one database system? Go ahead.
Thank you. No, each of the components, and I'm hoping, is my screen showing at this point in time? I hope so. And yeah, working under that assumption, each of the components, the OpenHE API, the iris, and the resource map, reside on separate servers. and not in the same database. It's been designed and implemented as a component-driven approach to allow us to swap out components if we find that the particular functions that are requested by one of the particular registries are available already. We can then plug into that. So it's not a shrink-wrap product that comes together. We are focusing on a component design. Another thing to note, if I can take a second, is that each of these tools here are open source and will be made available, but that does not preclude the fact that there are many commercially available tools that fill the same roles of what we see over here too.
Right. Could you clarify the difference between a facility registry and a client registry?
By all means. A facility registry is, to simplify it, it's a database containing information about health centers for a country or a district. It has, in the resource map example, we have the GIS information for that particular facility. It's GPS coordination, that's part of it. What services it's having available there, the contact details for that particular facility. It's really focused at managing the facility itself. The client registry is looking at the demographic information of any patients within the system. The client registry does not have any medical data associated to it. The information stored in there, for example, is the demographics such as the name, first name, last name, any address or location that we can find, contact details, relations to other clients in it. But it is uniquely focused on the client and has a close relationship with the national ID system in Rwanda. That's what we will be building in the future.
So the facility registry and the client registry are independent of each other, because a client can actually go to different facilities, and different facilities can have many clients, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, good. We actually had a lot of questions on the health interoperability access layer, and I'll go through them all through, and then maybe you can just give one answer that gets all of these already done. So one is from me. What is the underlying engine for your OpenHIM in Rwanda? Is it based on an existing enterprise service bus? Then Sambat asked from Cambodia, how do you use an OpenHIM, and when do you use it? And the question from Erwin is, can you already use it without localization? And can localization be done on an OpenHIM?
All right. So thank you for that. If I can start with those three first and foremost. So the OpenHIM is an invisible service. It has no user interface besides an error monitoring queue for users to use. It's focused at any service applications that use it itself. So that's important to note, because I think it speaks a little bit to the localization, but I'll come back to that in a second. Alvin, to answer your question, the OpenHIM is built on Mule ESB, which is an enterprise-ready open source ESB. It's got quite a big following, and you can have a look at that. So it's not custom built from the ground up. It's built on proven technologies that are already existing. And included in that, we've also made a use of web services as our endpoint, i.e. where applications and registries connect to it, because of the stability and we know the robustness of web services that just the general expanse of the internet has created. So it is built on an existing ESB, and it empowers web services to allow communication with other tools. Localization, by the definition of localization, I'm assuming we're talking of actual languages, the difference between the languages in country. The OpenHIM does not require any localization to it, as it's an invisible service. Users don't use it at that stage. It's really a transaction gateway, and what it does transforms. So it would pick up, for example, a message coming through from the OpenMRS that is an HL7 message with information about the client, so the patient who's collected it, where it was collected, who collected it, and what data was collected. And that message would go into the interoperability layer, or the OpenHIM, which would, from that message, extract and query the client registry to uniquely identify the client, to get the UUID of the client, which is a system unique ID, to do the same for the provider to ensure that, firstly, that the client is correct and that get their ID, same for the provider, that this is a correct provider and their ID, and to verify that the facility that this information is coming from is a registered facility within the network and is allowed to send information. That information, once we've got that piece of information, the data within it, so the medical observations, this could be weight, height, CD4 counts, each of these are lifted out, and the mapping of these are mapped against the terminology service to ensure that these are mapped against the correct terminologies. So if, for example, we're having a message coming in saying that this patient has been diagnosed with TB, and what we're able to do is query the terminology service for the ICD-10 code, which we'll just call A17 at this point, 0.0, and what would be stored in the shared health record is the unique client ID, the unique provider ID who collected that information for the client, where it was collected, a date and time stamp, and the terminology-based observation. So instead of just saying diagnostics TB, the diagnosis TB, the diagnosis would say, the ICD-10 code for TB A17.0. So that I stepped down into that to illustrate that the localization is not needed in the interoperability layer or the OpenHIM, but if there are areas that do require user interface, this can be changed. The languages can be changed to meet whichever country it's been deployed in. And coming to the third question.
Go ahead.
So the third question was how and when to use an OpenHIM.
Yep.
So the OpenHIM is designed to facilitate interoperability between services. So we look at it to provide a single point of contact for any point of care or point of service application to communicate to, and it aggregates all the calls into the infrastructure services, which we're seeing on the screen at the moment. So the HIM, in fact, allows us to say to any point of care system that these are the calls that you need to, if you can consume any of these web services calls, we can guarantee you that you'll be able to get the range of services at the top. So when one would implement it is if you're to promote interoperability between systems. Our next project is to actually promote interoperability from OpenMRS through into DHIS to have automated data aggregation sent up into it. And so we would use it in that example there. But it is relatively tightly tied to this infrastructure, and we would use it as soon as you have two or more of these, one and above, we would promote using it. But as soon as you start to put two of the infrastructure services up, we would promote putting an HIM down. Firstly, because it allows you to scale. You can tell any service provider, and depending on how the project works, you may prescribe or promote the use of your services, and then be able to build out incrementally at the back end, each of the back end being the infrastructure level, which components you have available. It also creates a level of abstraction that if you decide to swap out any of the components like the terminology service for another type of application, the end users are not affected by it.
Interesting. Wow.
I hope I answered those questions.
So would it be like this is a simplistic analogy that I had thought of while you were describing this. Would the OpenHIM be similar to an intelligent telephone switchboard? The messages pass through it, but more than just letting messages go through it, it also makes sure that the messages are complete sentences, and that the sentences contain information about the client, the professional, the facility, and the terminology.
That's a very good simplistic way of looking at it. It's a very intelligent telephone exchange.
Switchboard. Yeah. Great.
Switchboard, yes.
Okay. I have more questions here, Carl, if you don't mind.
Please.
How many points of care do you have right now for Rwanda in its current implementation of the OpenHie? That's from Dr. Sambat.
Great. That's a great question. We currently have gone live with a small subset of 2 point-of-care applications. The reason for that being is we're testing the clinical flow of this of the system, any challenges we're finding with messages coming into the system. So right now we deployed in 2 that are live and running, but by the end of the year we would have deployed to 15, including a district hospital. And once we've been able to refine the 2 that we're at, it becomes a relatively drop and go approach to deploying these in new health centers and switching on this connectivity.
All right. And does Rwanda have a national standard data dictionary? And
yes,
so,
they do.
How do did they get an ISO certificate? That came from Dr. Sam, but maybe we can ask him to elucidate about that. But do you have a national standard data dictionary in Rwanda right now?
We're building towards national medical standards and Rwanda. So the answer is a bit of yes and no. That Rwanda has a standard medical concept library that they're using in conjunction with subsets of ICD-10 and SNOMED and a few others, as well as using the maternal concept lab OpenMRS concepts. These standards are not ISO rated at this stage, although I do believe there is investigation underway by the Ministry of Health to standardize, to include some of their terminologies in these broader standards. So, and what we've got on the screen in front of us is not ISO certified. I did see a question come up there. We're not ISO certified in this at this point in time.
All right. From Annie, the question is OpenHie, I think it's OpenHIM, similar with Mirth?
In fact, that's a fantastic question. The difference between OpenHIM and Mirth is very minimal. Mirth and OpenHIM are built on the same underlying technology, Mule. And in fact, we looked at using Mirth originally to full array the OpenHIM, but we found that with the open source version, its SSL and security certificates were not that easy to use, and it didn't really have a nice web services face for us when we first started. So they are similar, but we have found a slight divergence in where we built this and how do we get it built. But we have spent a lot of time with the Mirth guys, and we will be looking back at Mirth in the future to see if it can be a viable substitute for the OpenHIM. Also, Mirth is only an HL7 system at this point in time, where we're still defining the range of standards that we can talk through our OpenHIM.
Whoa, we have a lot of questions. Sorry, Carl. I hope it's okay.
Please go ahead.
So you answered that there are 2 right now in the subset in Rwanda. And there's another question here. How many applications are currently connected to the Rwandan OpenHIM? So these are not points of care. These are now applications.
Okay, so the HIM at this stage has 5 infrastructure applications connected to it. That's the client registry, provider, facility, shared health record, and terminology service. And so that's from the infrastructure level. We then have a rapid SMS server connecting to it, so that puts us at 6. And at this stage, we also have 2 health centers connecting to it as and when they require. So at this stage, we've got, I think our tally is at 8 there. By the end of this coming year, we should be at close to 25 applications. And remembering that there should be less applications connected in the infrastructure level because these are single points of truth, and we're expecting a lot more applications to start connecting from the point of service level. And we're also looking at potentially working with a group in Rwanda to open up some of these services to the commercial area, the commercial developers, to promote the use of smaller apps like web apps and quick visualizers and that, and create a bit of a health economy around health apps in Rwanda.
Right. So, Carl, let me clarify this. In the ideal world, you would have 5 infrastructure registries at the top: the client registry, the professional registry, the facilities registry, the terminology service. Sorry. Could you go back to the? Could you go back to the slide? Yeah, sorry. I was going to refer to the. Yeah. This one is good. You would have the yellow boxes on top would be, as they are, 5 of them, because they would be the references or the standards. and you would have many blue boxes at the bottom.
Absolutely,
as many
that's correct.
implementations, and for as long as they comply with the standards on the yellow boxes, and comply with the communication standards on the green box, the HIM, then the theory is the message flows from one facility to another facility. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Perfect.
Yes. And to support that a little further, this is the Canadian model, which is a lot what we're looking towards. And you can see there's, I don't want to say limitless because it sounds arrogant, and that's not our intention, but the various use flows that require services can connect through the HIM. It's not only modeled for 5, and here we can see in Canada that they have a range of systems from laboratory to diagnostic imaging, drug information, data warehouse pulling off of it. We've also got security management, configuration. So there's a lot of aspects that one can use and a range of different services that can connect below it, from clinicians to labs, and make use of the central infrastructure.
Okay, here's one from Village. Are there any differences in terms of enterprise architecture design and implementation among different countries? Have you seen, have you seen some patterns, or have you seen some non-patterns over?
There, a bit of both, and that's a very cop-out answer, but it's true that there are some foundational patterns that are being developed. What we're seeing coming out about the needs and the visions and how these are being pulled together. And I think a lot of what we're also seeing in the developing world is as soon as a pattern becomes available, the adoption of that pattern to achieve a goal, and then the refinement of it as we're moving forward. In Africa, and particularly the countries we're working in, we are seeing patterns of the adoptions of certain terminology sets and message flows and capacities of how we're getting this pulled together. And there will obviously be some divergences coming in, as one expects in any approach, and particularly as you look at what are the objectives and the vision of the country towards eHealth. If it's a very simple, low impact, small footprint system, your vision is going to be more constrained, and you may not have that much divergence from the pattern. But if you start to bring in a broader vision and more business cases, you may find that your architecture would need to expand a little to achieve that. But the principle of what we have here in terms of the implementation of an electronic solution that supports an enterprise architecture, we feel at this stage that this pattern is probably quite a solid one that can achieve many of the goals that are going into it. That, however, does not preclude us from looking at different architectures about how we can do this moving forward.
Great. There's a quick question here. Maybe you can have a quick answer. I heard that Rwanda is ISO certified. This is Roy Consulta. Is it ISO 27799 or another ISO certification?
Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to answer that question authoritatively. This may be some, at least in our project, where we haven't addressed this particular ISO. But there may be a deeper project in Rwanda that has its ISO certification coming up.
Okay. From Dr. Sambat, how different is the client health record? I think those are the ones in the blue boxes at the bottom, from the shared health record, the yellow box at the top. They're both health records, but how different or similar are they?
That's a great question. I'm going to start with the shared health record at the top. The shared health record is, in this example, is the common data points that the Ministry of Health has depicted would be available to any service in the country. It's a set grouping of it. Your point of service applications at the bottom, if they contribute towards and utilize the shared health record information, they can either instantiate, they can have more than what's just in the shared health record. So for example, we've got clinics running HIV, TB, and what's the word I'm looking for at this stage? It's got mental health programs running in it, but we're only, at this stage, we've only expanded into some of the HIV area. It does not preclude it does not stop the point of service applications in the blue boxes at the bottom from collecting all this information, but the shared health record is the central point of only information around HIV at this stage, and the next phase of the project is to add more data points for it to collect. So while the applications are being used, for example, in the blue box at the bottom is OpenMRS and the shared health record is OpenMRS, something that's important to note is there's a very big design decision and discussion going around about changing out OpenMRS as the tool for the shared health record, because the shared health record is designed to be fast and very transaction proficient, more of a service than an interface-based system.
Right.
I hope that answered the question. If not, please ask me to clarify on any particular points, because it is a good distinction to make.
Two more questions. Is the OpenHIM envisioned to be a single conduit of information in any country instance, or is it possible to have more than one HIE in one country? Over.
Technically it is possible to have more than one HIE in the country. I wouldn't promote different clinics, the same clinic connecting to two separate HIEs that perform the same function. And I say that lightly because in Canada you actually have a federated architecture, which is each province has its own HIM. And then between the provinces there is connectivity into other HIMs. Into HIEs, using the interoperability layers. So Canada has this federated architecture where each province can maintain their own set of tools and that speak the right standards in it going forward. But what my personal, and this is me as Carl Fourie taking forward, is I don't see there being a lot of case in the countries we're working in to stand up more than one HIE. Now, there is a lot of effort in terms of getting this up and running, especially from the ground up, and it would be better to focus your efforts on maintaining a single HIE, my current feeling, than trying to maintain multiple ones for different use cases. But also the HIE is designed to break silo programs. That's something I didn't mention, and my apologies, I should have mentioned this in the presentation. What we're looking at in Rwanda is while we've started with the PMTCT and the antenatal care programs, we do not view the system as program-based, but rather patient-based. That we treat the patient and we store information for the patient who happens to be sick. We don't store information about the disease who happens to have a patient.
Correct. That's a great philosophy. $1 million question, Carl, and the final question. Is the code of the HIM open, and is it available?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes, and yes in a little bit.
Not yet.
So not yet. It has been designed and with full intent from the start to make it open, and as part of the HIE initiative, we will be opening it up. What we're doing at the moment, we can make it available to those who've requested, but we're actually in the process of creating a community environment for it and looking to release it in the next.
Carl? We lost Carl. Carl, you muted yourself. So just click on the microphone icon again, please. Carl? And so while... What happened?
He's still unmute. He's unmuted.
Okay, what happened to Carl? Maybe he disconnected his microphone. But while we're waiting for Carl, just to inform those who are attending, oh, he got offline. Maybe he pulled this wired cable. While waiting for Carl to come in, just to inform everyone that PhilHealth and the Department of Health are now under discussions to talk about who takes care of what registries, and that we will be working on a health interoperability access layer that will be based on open standards and open source software, so that as many stakeholders in the country would be able to participate. And as opposed to Jembi and Rwanda that are using the architecture for maternal care and child care, we will be using it in PhilHealth for electronic claims. So the architecture is the same, but the application will be different. But I guess it's the same philosophy that in the end it will be able to address all the other types of applications. Carl, are you back? You might want to finish.
Yes. Yes, I'm hoping that did my response to the open source question come through, or did I cut off halfway through it?
You can repeat it just to make sure we got it right.
Okay. So it will be made open source shortly. We are preparing a platform to launch it off of, and that platform will include some technical resources that would better guide those who are looking to pick up this tool as to how to get started. We don't want to release it into the wild without any guidance. We don't think that would be a wise approach.
Great. We will be interested from the Philippines, Carl, when that gets ready. We're writing up a grant to get an HIM implemented, and we'll be happy to work together with you on that.
Fantastic, and we'll definitely continue to work with you on that. We should be expecting the release in the next month and a half or two.
All right. Thank you, Carl, and good luck. We are so happy to have you. I know it's a difficult time for some because it's a Muslim holiday for some. Thank you very much for still taking time to come in. Thank you very much to Carl Fourie and Jembi for the time that they've given, and to everyone. As usual, before we end on AeHIN, by tradition, we ask everyone to open their webcams and wave, and we take a picture. So please do so now.
Are we all?
Okay, Aliyah, say cheese when it's ready.
Wow. Okay, we'll still wait for the others. I think.
We're going to congest the network.
Okay, so anyway, I say cheese. One. Are you ready? One, okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Let's see that.
Look at the others. Yeah, Carl, you can stay behind. Roy, okay na. You can mute your webcam already. Dr. Sambat and Virechai, you can mute your, and let's give a chance for the others. But Carl stays.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Aliyah, you can X the Thailand and the Cambodian webcams so we can get the others in.
Okay.
I don't know if Professor Alampay and Dr. Sam, Attorney Sam, can share their video. One last chance.
For Indonesia, Sorseng An. And from Thailand, Wirachai Chansud. Are we all in?
From Attorney Sam Matunog.
He's using his... Oh, we lost some.
We're getting an advertisement from you.
There, from Thailand. Sorseng An is from Indonesia, I think. Okay? So, Attorney Sam, are you on? Okay.
I think that's his avatar. Go ahead, Aliyah.
Okay. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Smile. Okay, I got it. Can you see yourselves on the screen?
Okay.
Okay. So
right.
That's it.
Thank you very much, Aliyah. Thank you very much, Carl, and to those who attended. We will continue the discussions on HingeX, and we can start sharing resources and experiences. Richai asked a question about, will you please tell the step-by-step to establish EA? And Carl, would you like to answer that very quickly before we end?
Sure, I'll step through that. I think the one aspect to have a look at, I'm going to type it in here quickly as we go, is have a look at the Health Enterprise Architecture Framework. This is a methodology that we've been developing in light of what we've done in Rwanda. It's built a lot on the TOGAF, the Open Group Architecture Framework, and very simply, the first approach is understand the vision of what you're looking to do. So once you've got your vision, you can start looking at the business practices and following the various steps in the TOGAF model to document what's going on and how that goes forward. So very simply understand what you want to do, how to do it, what you can use to get it right, and then start mapping that to technologies and standards, and remembering that an architecture is not a technology or a software, it's a set of requirements, and the way you implement it can change based on what you find is available. I hope that is quick and easy enough with enough time.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Carl, and have a happy weekend, everyone. Thank you for attending the AeHIN Hour. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.